administration. This information is solely for educational purposes only and includes recent advances in research on micronutrients. Engage, the micronutrient company, does not claim that our products diagnose, treat, cure, heal, or prevent any disease or injury. However, Engage's products are formulated to address nutritional deficiencies and supply the body with the required nutrients. It's important to note that nothing here is meant to be a substitute for professional medical treatment or a visit to a consultation with your primary healthcare provider. So that having been taken care of, Dr. Kort, I'm going to go ahead and shift it back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Prasad, do you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, folks, I am so excited to be here with Dr. Prasad tonight because we're going to be discussing his paper, the most recent paper that you have published, and it was March 2nd of 2024 is this paper, and it is titled. First of all, it's in the World Journal of Pharmaceutical and Life Sciences. And the reason it's so important for tonight, and this is going to continue into next month, it is the proposed implementation of concepts of ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable, and PAMARA, protection as much as reasonably achievable, to reduce the health risks of EMF radiation. Dr. Prasad, I have been waiting for this paper since 2015. I am so excited. So with that, I would like to I'm going to read a bit of the abstract. And I'd like to just tell people, yeah, Jeff can pull up the paper, but this is just the beginning of the abstract on this, folks. The advent of wireless communication technology has led to an increased exposure to EMF radiation that enhance the risk of adverse health effects to humans. The introduction of 5G, fifth generation wireless technology, which transmits a signal at much higher frequency ranges from 3 to 300 gigahertz than previous generations, has raised further concerns about the impact on human health. That's just the beginning of it. Yeah. Dr. Prasad, we have been talking about this for quite some time.
That's correct.
Yeah. Years and years. There's a little bit, I'm going to skip a couple of other things because I just don't want to read the whole thing, but further down in the abstract, you said, supplementation with individual antioxidants reduces oxidative stress and protection against EMF radiation-induced damage. The major objectives of this review are to briefly describe the biological responses of 5G frequency range or less, EMF, electromagnetic field radiation-induced and increased risk of cancer, neurological and non-neurological damage, and thirdly, the role of increased oxidative stress and inflammation in such damage. The review proposes that the implement of the concept of ALARA, and this is a radiation term that I heard about 25 years ago, as low as reasonably achievable, which we use in the X-ray world, and PAMARA, which I understand is your baby. You came up with PAMARA, protection as much as reasonably achievable, to introduce or to reduce the health risk of EMF radiation exposure. A micronutrient mixture is suggested to implement the concept of PAMARA in the population.
That's correct.
Well, let's get this party started. You know, a few years ago, you and I lectured at the Oregon Chiropractic Convention, and there we afterwards We were there on stage together. It was one of the
Yep.
greatest moments of my life, standing there with you on stage talking about the military formula. And
Yep.
then that night, you and we and Jet shared research, and you took that home and looked at it for several months. And you came back and you said, do you remember what you said?
Yeah.
You said to me, Dr. Kort, I believe that this is a very real situation and that EMF could be a catastrophic health crisis because
Yep.
unlike radiation exposure from ionizing radiation, this is a radiation that everyone has and everyone carries on their body.
Yep.
Even though it's not ionizing radiation, it's non-ionizing radiation.
Yep.
So, folks, I just want to take you a little bit into my history real quickly. I actually brought cell phones into Australia back in 1987. And I remember when I was there that when I was working selling cell phones, and I started with cordless phones, which is radio frequencies, and then switched to cellular frequencies, I had problems with brain fog and some motor dysfunction, and I just didn't feel like I was 100% there. But when I traveled to other parts of Australia, my brain felt clear. It wasn't until a couple of months ago, almost 40 years later, that I actually put all this together. But we'll talk a little bit in just a little bit about some of the symptoms that I experienced. But in your paper, you said in the introduction, and I highlighted a few things that I wanted to talk to you about. Here's my goal tonight. I want to talk about your paper, and I just brought a few of the pages and highlighted some areas. So I want to talk about the abstract and your thoughts, the introduction, and then what our solutions are utilizing Core 4, and we can even go into my ultimate bundle, which is Core 4, plus Sleep Boost, Digestive Enzyme,
Yeah.
and Brain Boost. So at present, this is in your introduction at the bottom of the page. At present, there are no suggested mechanisms of protection against potential harmful effects of EMF radiation.
That's correct.
Tell us more.
Well, it is analogous to 1960 tobacco. Remember that story? That tobacco scientists at that time are saying it is not addictive, it does not cause cancer. But then we know what happened. And the same way right now, many people are denying that the EMF radiation has no relevance for human health. And but data, and you are the one, Dr. Kort, who propagated this concept that we have to be concerned. And otherwise, if I did not meet you, I would not have done anything of EMF radiation, any research. But so credit goes to you. And so it is impossible. So, even the growing technology, 5G, now 10G might come say, this makes life easier for communication purposes, but one has to be also aware of potentially hazard that it creates to you, to your family. And so the question is, what can be done considering the reality that it is difficult to eliminate it? When you go for X-ray, only time if you have X-ray, because you have some diagnostic procedure, and then you go home one time, then you don't have to come another next few years. So it is infrequent one. But here is the constant one. EMF radiation exposure. Right now we are working with the computer or cell phone, but cell phone is the most frequently that you come in contact with. Nevertheless, the worker, in office, at least 8 hours a day, they are facing computer. So you can't avoid this. This is reality. So the question is what we can do to reduce it. And like Dr. Kort was mentioning, they try to reduce as much as reasonable, achievable, and he will tell you what are the possibilities that you can do more easily, and at least try to educate people and especially children. Children are more sensitive to anything. Non-ionizing radiation, ionizing radiation, non-external stressor, environmental factor, they are very much more sensitive. And so we have to be aware of that. And so it is very important. Not only that, we also have many of them are one or more micro deficiency children. So it is especially critical to protect the children against oxidative stress and inflammation, especially coming out from the cell phone. And so now, yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Prasad, I've been sensitive to my environment with some of these symptoms that we're going to talk about here in just a minute since I was a kid. But I remember when I was in Australia and I was in Melbourne where we were importing phones, I remember what it felt like to have one of the very first phones in a continent. And I was walking around thinking, I had a full head of hair, an American accent, a $4,000 phone. I mean, I was all that in a bag of chips. But I was walking down the street in Melbourne, and I'm talking on the phone and people are sitting there looking at me. And it was a huge dopamine dump. Dopamine, such an important neurotransmitter. But it's also, 40 years later, 37 years later, I'm looking at the addictive process that I experienced, when I was there. And now I was one of the very few people in the entire continent that had a phone. And now everybody in the world has a phone. But it's not just a phone. It's all the bees in the room. So we're looking at phones, we're looking at computers, we're looking at Wi-Fi, we're looking at our televisions that run on Bluetooth, our stereo systems, incredible things, even smart homes. I was in a home recently that had a smart refrigerator. You call it and it tells you what's in there, with a big giant screen on it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but all of these things have an effect on us.
Yep.
But then there's the brain effect. And as you said, since 1999, children have never been born out of Wi-Fi. That's really around the time that I started feeling the symptoms of electromagnetic hypersensitivity, at least to the point where it was overwhelming. You kind of can push through the symptoms of brain fog and even muscle dysfunction and just say, I've got to get this done. And you push through it. But in 99, it became much more noticeable because my hands burned. It made my head hurt when I put my phone near my head. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Now, and one other thing I wanted to share with you, and this is, I think, probably one of the most important points. I have a very good friend named Dan, and Dan actually worked at Bell Laboratories, and he was part of making our computers talk to one another, and then making our computers talk to printers and so forth. And I said to him a few weeks ago, did you ever think about the biological beings in the room when you were setting up all this wireless technology for these things to talk to one another? And he said, no, we were engineers. All we cared about was making the computers talk to the printers, and we didn't care about anybody else in the room. And that's really what your paper talks about here in another one of the pieces that I broke out, is that at present, there are no guidelines for tissue protection against EMF radiation damage to humans. In fact, there's really no studies that have been done on humans regarding EMF. Can you tell us more about that, please?
No, I think there are some studies. For example, remember the not systematic study like we have done in the animal model, because in animal model, you can control exactly how much you are delivering EMF radiation and what are the consequences are. But in human study, remember that in the newspaper, Havana Syndrome, and they thought that CIA thought that the government is trying to hurt us. Then we have a Chinese syndrome. And then we have a Washington syndrome. Then finally, government appointed a scientist of all disciplines, epidemiology, biological, and physicists, and so on. Big, huge organization. And their job was to evaluate this syndrome, because even the animal, one couple in Chinese, when they develop this kind of acute syndrome that you are describing, Dr. Kort, their even dog was affected. So it was not just the human. And so this committee discussed for several months and tried to eliminate one by one. And finally, their conclusion was that is most likely it is EMF radiation, which is causing so-called Havana Syndrome and so on. But in human study has been an isolated case. But, like one of the quoting was that even industrial worker, even early days, way before even computer was developed or cell phone was developed, they used to work in fix the electronics or electrical wire. They used to have sleeping disturbances, depression, and anxiety.